Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our discussion series on the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm Congresswoman Lori Trahan, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be hosting our second installment of a larger series that breaks down the many ways that families will benefit from this landmark piece of legislation that was signed into law by the president on Tuesday. Today, we are specifically talking about the clean energy and the climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to save families here in Massachusetts thousands of dollars on their energy bills. It's going to create thousands of new jobs, and it's going to put a sizable dent in the climate crisis. I'll try not to take up too much time talking about everything that's in the climate portion of this legislation because we have such an outstanding guest with us today. But I do have to start off by saying that the Inflation Reduction Act, first and foremost, will make it more affordable for working families to purchase energy efficient appliances, make home repairs, and lower their utility bills. It does so by providing rebates of up to 100% of cost on new appliances like heat pumps and water heaters, dryers, stoves, and ovens. And millions of families in Massachusetts are going to be eligible to get their money back for various purchases. But it doesn't stop there. There are new and expanded tax credits to help low and middle income families install solar panels in their homes to better insulate and weatherize their homes and to upgrade their HVAC systems. At the same time, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to invest over $11 billion in large scale clean power generation and storage here in the Commonwealth over the next 8 years. Those investments will mean that the 113,000 high quality, good paying, clean energy jobs we already have here in Massachusetts will continue to climb. It means we'll reduce our dependence on fossil fuels that have been a key driver of the inflation every family is feeling right now. And it means we'll create even more manufacturing jobs because the tools and the technologies we need to fuel that transition will be made right here in America, and here in Massachusetts, too. So the Inflation Reduction Act will also reduce air pollution with investments for cleaner public transit vehicles, a clean energy and sustainability accelerator, and a long overdue penalty for fossil fuel companies that release egregious amounts of methane. For families, this legislation will help with the purchase of an electric or hybrid vehicle with upfront discounts of up to $7,500 on new cars and $4,000 on used EVs, a benefit millions of Bay Staters will be eligible for. So, in total, the Inflation Reduction Act represents the largest climate investment in our nation's history, with $370 billion going to combat the climate crisis. And it puts the United States on a path to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. These provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act are a win for Massachusetts family, a win for our nation, and certainly a win for our planet. And what I've described already is only the start of what this legislation does. And that's why we're so fortunate to be joined today by a remarkable expert on all things climate to help me unpack this bill for you. Our guest this morning is Susanna Hatch. She is the Director of Clean Energy Policy at the Environmental League of Massachusetts. The Environmental League has worked for years to ensure that Massachusetts is a leader in environmental and economic sustainability. They've been on the front lines of the fight to get our state's new climate bill across the finish line, and they've been a key partner in negotiations at the federal level on the Inflation Reduction Act. In her role as Director of Clean Energy Policy, Susanna is an expert in these very policies and a leader on ELM's incredible research and advocacy teams. There's no doubt that Susanna's work has contributed to where we are today, talking about our nation's largest climate action investment. So grateful that she's able to join us today. Susanna, welcome.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's an honor to be here. And I just want to say thank you for your hard work and your leadership in Congress on behalf of Massachusetts residents. As you mentioned, this is the largest climate and clean energy investment in our nation's history. To paraphrase our former President Obama, it's a big deal. So we are really, really thrilled to see that it made it across the finish line and is going to really make a huge difference for the economy and for the climate.
Absolutely. And we're just going to start off and jump into questions. We've got a bunch. And, our constituents and the folks tuning in, they have questions too. So the Environmental League of Massachusetts has been on the front lines of the fight to treat climate change like the global crisis that we all know it is. And I think first and foremost, it's important for folks tuning in to know that we view this as the beginning, not the end of our leadership as a nation on this issue. Can you just speak a little bit about why that's the case?
Yes, would be happy to. To start, as you mentioned in your remarks, this bill will get us to 40% emission reductions by 2030. That is a huge chunk and a huge accomplishment for us to be proud of. It doesn't quite get us to where we need to go for 50% by 2030. So there's definitely more work to be done. And while we should celebrate this win for sure, there's a lot to be done in order to avert the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And that could come in many forms. It could come through additional federal action. It could also be strengthened by state and local climate action. I know you mentioned within the same week as the IRA passing, Massachusetts passed a really sweeping climate bill in the Commonwealth as well. So one week ago today, they passed a sweeping bill that includes investments and incentives for clean energy, for offshore wind, for transportation and electric vehicles, et cetera. So it's the states and local cities and towns could have a real part to play to help us get to that goal that we need to reach. But also worth mentioning, while the incentives and the tax credits and other programs in this bill are really important steps to ensure that we are investing in clean energy solutions and moving towards a clean energy future, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to implement everything that is included in this bill. So, while this guarantees a lot of clean energy investment, we need to work hard to ensure that these resources get built and that they get built responsibly as well. And there will be more work to be done beyond traditional clean energy projects that we think about, such as wind farms and solar projects and storage. We also need to do a lot to expand our transmission system in order to make sure that all of the clean energy that we'll be bringing online will be able to be delivered to where it's needed. So that will be another critical component as well. So there's a lot of great provisions in this bill, and it's up to all of us to make sure that we keep ourselves accountable to what is included in here to ensure that everything that is promised in the law really comes to fruition and that we're able to reach those climate goals that we mentioned before.
That's right. And we'll be looking forward, to that partnership to kind of continue the momentum. I know that, we're all understandably excited about the historic climate provisions in the legislation that are going to directly help the planet. But there's also a number of investments that will save families here in Massachusetts and across our country money on their energy bills. Could you talk us through some of the most important investments you've been paying attention to on that front?
Yeah, there are a number of them. Just for a big picture number, according to Rewiring America, the incentives that are included in this bill will save the average household a whopping $1,800 per year on energy bills. So that's an enormous amount of savings. And those investments and savings can come from incentives for replacing inefficient furnaces with electric heat pumps, by installing efficient water heaters, and by installing solar. It also makes electric vehicles much more affordable, which are more efficient and of course don't use gas. And the price of gas is a huge problem for working families these days. So with the incentives on electric vehicles, customers will be able to save up to $7,500 on the purchase of a new EV. And so a lot of these benefits are because these modern appliances and these new types of vehicles are more energy efficient. And so that alone will help save working families a lot of money. Another thing that I want to mention, the clean energy investments in particular will really help drive energy independence as well in our nation. Clean energy, a lot of it, including offshore wind, particularly in New England and Massachusetts, is a local renewable energy resource. It's an abundant resource off of our coast. And so that will, expanding those industries will really increase our energy independence, and will also increase reliability of our energy and get us away from the price volatility of fossil fuels that we've been seeing over the last several months because of the conflict in Ukraine and because of inflation and fossil fuel companies really jacking up prices. So that's a huge piece of it as well. And as we move towards a clean energy future, we're going to see those energy prices stabilize so that folks can afford their energy as well as other essentials in everyday life.
That's right. The energy independence is such a huge economic, factor, especially as we move toward clean energy. Another benefit that I just want to touch on was the 9 million clean energy jobs that the Inflation Reduction Act will create, right? I've been reading a lot about how this part of the bill will build on what we're already doing here in Massachusetts with offshore wind, as you mentioned, even fusion energy research, which is happening right in the heart of the district I represent in Devens. Where do you think we'll see these jobs in the coming months and years, especially here in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, we do already have over 100,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts, and these investments will really increase those and bring investment to the Commonwealth to drive up those jobs. I should mention, in my role as the Director of Clean Energy Policy at ELM, I'm also the regional lead for a coalition called New England for Offshore Wind. So I always love to talk about offshore wind, and that is going to be one of the largest opportunities for the Commonwealth in the coming decades. It's set to create tens of thousands of high quality jobs in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts has the highest potential for this particular source of energy than anywhere else in the country. So that really is a demonstration of the jobs benefits that we're going to see here. So that ranges from construction and assembly of wind farms, operation maintenance, but it also means a lot of other jobs, including project design, engineering, and we have a lot of high education institutions in Massachusetts that are already leading the charge in that. One other thing that's really important to note in this job is that a lot of the incentives for clean energy also include incentives for prevailing wage. So not only are we going to see a lot of jobs being provided because of these industries, but we're likely to see a real boost in the number of high quality jobs for working families. It will also boost U.S. manufacturing, which is really critical for all sorts of industries, including offshore wind, because we really need to boost the domestic supply chain in order to reach the scale that we need to get to address climate change. Having a local supply chain will also decrease cost and, of course, provide the high quality jobs that I mentioned before. And it's a real opportunity for places in the Commonwealth, such as Somerset and Salem, to transition to the clean energy. Those two communities in particular used to house some of the largest coal plants in New England and are now really set to reap the benefits of the offshore wind industry. And of course, as I mentioned before, the Massachusetts climate bill that passed within the week of the IRA and in Congress also has a lot of provisions for offshore wind and other clean energy as well to drive workforce development and to make sure that it's developed equitably and responsibly. And I'll just finish by you mentioned fusion. I know you're the chair of the Fusion Caucus in Congress. So that is another potential game-changing technology in the fight against climate change. And there's already a lot of research and work going on in that space in Massachusetts. And this bill includes a lot of additional funding for that research. So we're likely to see some great benefits there as well.
Absolutely. And I think you're right to point out the jobs across the spectrum, right? I mean, Massachusetts is poised to win, obviously, with our academic institutions and, even with commercialization of fusion energy, which we're seeing a spinoff of MIT, but also those great union jobs, right? Those ones that really lift families up, families like the one I grew up in. And so it's always been, an economic and environmental imperative to get this bill over the line, which really does lead me to my next question. It's remarkable what this investment is delivering. And it was really important that when this legislation was crafted, that we included language to ensure that people aren't left behind, right? Historically underserved communities often bear the brunt of pollution and climate disasters. The Inflation Reduction Act seeks to finally change that. Can you just describe a little bit about how prioritizing climate action in these communities, cities like Lawrence, for example, is so important if we're going to make a dent in this crisis?
Yeah, certainly. Environmental justice communities, as you mentioned, are really already bearing the brunt and the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis today, from public health impacts to poor air quality to the heat island effect in urban areas without sufficient green space. And all of this, it already exists and will, of course, be exacerbated by climate change as it progresses. So we really have to work proactively to reverse the effects of decades of poor planning and lack of investment and pollution impacts. The IRA really takes major steps towards ensuring that historically marginalized groups and communities are leaders in our climate response and are well positioned to benefit from the green economy as well. And so to reach that clean energy future for all, we need to really target resources to the communities that need them most. And some of these investments in the IRA include $3 billion for environmental and climate justice block grants for community-led projects, $3 billion for transportation access grants for underserved communities, and $236 million for air pollution monitoring. That's just a piece of the larger investment in funding for disadvantaged communities. So EJ communities like Lawrence have been left out of the conversation for far too long. They have serious structural challenges to achieving a net zero economy. But the good news is that these are also areas where our investments can go a long way, whether it's weatherization of old housing to save money on energy, greening our urban spaces, or fixing gas leaks. There's a ton of work to be done. But once we have the resources in place, much of it thanks to this bill, we can make progress really quickly. We also know that environmental justice communities do not always receive the considerations and protections that they should when it comes to siting and to the development of potentially harmful projects. So it's also worth noting that this bill includes an additional $750 million for the implementation of the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, across the federal government, so that executive agencies have the resources to properly review proposed infrastructure projects for siting in all communities.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I think you can tell how excited we are about the many, many climate provisions in this legislation. But I'm curious, as sort of our final question, if there's a provision or a program that hasn't been getting as much attention that you think folks should know about, could you maybe use this last opportunity to describe that?
Yeah, I'm gonna use this to cheat. I'm not gonna talk about a specific provision right now, but really just to highlight the demonstration of the passage of this bill alongside the Massachusetts climate bill that really shows how federal and state policy can work together and can be additive for the climate crisis, but also to save folks money. So one example that I'll give is, I already spoke about this a little, that the electric vehicle rebates that are included in this. There were electric vehicle rebates and incentives in the Massachusetts climate bill as well, and that's additive. And that means that in Massachusetts, people could save up to $10,000 off of an electric vehicle, which is huge. There's also increased funding for charging infrastructure on both levels, and of course, that we're going to need a lot of charging stations in order to accommodate the increased number of electric vehicles over the next few years. So it's just a specific example, but really one of many that we have a lot of work to do in the coming decades to secure a livable planet for future generations. But working together through the local, state, and federal policies, we can really make a huge difference in the fight against climate change and save working families thousands of dollars on their energy bills, provide high quality jobs, and improve public health by reducing pollution. So it's a really big deal, and we're thrilled, and really thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's in so those two bills working in tandem is really going to, people are going to feel the effects. And I think for us, working with our state and local partners to make sure people know, right? They know the incentives for making, these investments in their homes, doing their part to, increase efficiency and also save on their utility bills will be, what we'll all be working on together here in the state of Massachusetts. Susanna, thank you. I am so glad we had the opportunity to talk through what's in the Inflation Reduction Act and the savings headed for Massachusetts family. We're so grateful for the time that you took to participate in this conversation. And beyond that, just grateful for your expertise and relentless advocacy on these issues. There's no question that your work in the climate space has played a pivotal role in the passage of this historic legislation. So really, thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to learn more about this legislation and what it'll mean for our community and for our Commonwealth. I look forward to keeping you all updated on the many, many benefits headed our way thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.